A hospital emergency department operating at baseline capacity is an exercise in controlled variables. Beds are allocated. Staffing is balanced. At 9:17 a.m., a school bus accident shatters that baseline. 25 critical patients are inbound. Their estimated time of arrival is exactly 10 minutes. This graph charts the immediate deficit. Standard hospital capacity runs flat. At 9:17 a.m., the demand curve spikes vertically. The emergency room has only 5 open ICU beds and borderline oxygen reserves to meet it. The human psychological reaction to this data drop is visceral. The math is too complex, the variables are overlapping, and time is critically insufficient. In a mass casualty event, demand mathematically outstrips supply so rapidly that standard operational procedures simply break. At the center of this sudden organizational crisis stands one person, the incident commander. Untrained leaders facing this pressure often default to their instincts. They panic, attempt direct clinical intervention, and begin micromanaging frontline staff. This outlines the required alternative, the dual-track cognitive model. The internal track is the hidden burden. Here, the leader processes resource deficits, calculates ethical weights, and tracks cascading failures. The external track relies on strict, emotionless behavioral outputs to maintain structure and reduce ambient friction. Effective crisis leadership requires a deliberate structural dissociation between internal cognitive overload and external organizational output. Clinical heroism cannot scale to meet a systemic collapse. In the first 60 seconds following the mass casualty alert, sensory overload hits. Multiple staff members report overlapping variables simultaneously regarding bed counts, oxygen levels, and ambulance ETAs. This barrage of overlapping data must be treated as operational noise, rather than actionable signal. The incident commander makes a critical internal calculation. Delay is death. Deploying an imperfect structural framework immediately is a higher priority than waiting to formulate a perfect strategic plan. This chart replaces the initial chaos. This is the Hospital Incident Command System, or HICS. Operations is assigned instantly to establish triage logic and manage ER flow. Logistics secures backup supplies, while planning continuously tracks incoming patients. This establishes the cardinal rule of decentralized command. The incident commander issues absolutely no direct clinical orders to frontline staff. Forcing all communications strictly through designated roles rapidly drops ambient panic. The incident commander prioritizes the construction of a decentralized architecture. The clinical crisis is resolved by the system rather than the individual. Conceptual planning meets physical reality when ambulances arrive. This triggers the apex crisis of executive management, the requirement to ration life-saving resources. This animation illustrates the stark mathematical deficit facing the team. 10 critical patients are actively competing for only 5 open ICU beds. Internally, the commander carries the agonizing weight of a singular fact: they cannot save everyone. Externally, the system dictates a mandatory pivot from individual clinical empathy to broad systemic ethics. To resolve the resource deficit without hesitation, an algorithmic triage protocol is deployed. This protocol allocates resources strictly based on mathematical survivability metrics. It intentionally removes the burden of ethical choice from the frontline doctors. The commander utilizes short, definitive directives to reinforce this algorithmic process and shut down internal debate. When resource demand exponentially exceeds supply, rigorous organizational structure, not individual medical skill, dictates survivability. Once the core structure is established, new external threats inevitably attack its vulnerabilities. A localized logistics failure emerges. Hospital oxygen supplies will deplete in 45 minutes. The commander's immediate instinct is to personally intervene, abandon their central post, and solve the critical oxygen crisis. Notice how this diagram manages the threat. Direct intervention would collapse the entire system. Instead, the problem is routed exclusively to the logistics chief, bypassing the central commander. A second threat vector hits. News media begins broadcasting that the hospital is completely overwhelmed. Informational asymmetry creates immediate operational risk. A false external narrative can outpace the truth, triggering internal ER panic. The tactic here is threat isolation. A single public information officer is assigned to control the media narrative and shield the operational floor. A structural framework is only valid if the leader has the extreme discipline to trust its individual nodes during localized high-stakes failures. Jump forward to minute 6 of the simulation to observe the stabilized hospital environment. The operational atmosphere shifts. The initial chaos settles into a state of controlled urgency. The situation remains highly imperfect. Resources are tightly constrained, and the physical pressure placed on the medical staff is immense. As this diagram shows, the established system successfully processes the massive patient influx despite ongoing constraints. The incident commander sits at the top of this structure. They are stationary, observing, and completely isolated from the direct flow below. The ultimate success metric of a crisis leader is engineering a system so efficient that it renders their own direct intervention unnecessary. Crisis management operates on a harsh paradox. Leaders will never have enough time, and they will never have enough resources. Feeling internally overwhelmed during a crisis is not a failure of leadership. It is simply the baseline reality of the internal cognitive track. Contrast this internal reality with the mandatory external output. An unwavering composure acts as the foundational anchor for the entire organization. Disaster management demands an architect of resilience. The executive's primary function is to design the framework that sustains the response. Leadership centers on building an algorithmic system that functions even when the individual reaches their limit.